The U.S. Senator from Oregon, the Honorable Ron Wyden.
Hi, folks. Thanks, man. Where would you like me?
Pick a chair.
Here?
Great. And it should not go without noting Senator Wyden was one of the co-founders of this event and has been with us every year, so it's great to have you back.
Thank you.
So we have heard a fair amount throughout the day about the state's growing Medicaid costs. From your seat in Washington, is there anything that you can do to help alleviate that issue?
First of all, it is so good to be with you, and mention was made of the history. Nobody thought that this would ever get off the ground, and Dick Wrighton and Bill Thorndike, I hope he's out in the audience, Duncan Wise. Give those three in particular, I was so glad to be able to join them. Give those three a big round of applause. Here's where we are with Medicaid, and there are several moving pieces. First, our biggest challenge is the prospect that the president-elect and his allies in the Congress would try to block grant the program. If they do that, Oregon would likely lose billions of dollars, and we'd basically get pennies on the dollar. So I want it understood how important it is to push back on an idea like that. Second, a bit of good news, or it's certainly encouraging news, the 1115 waiver is basically what we use to, in effect, get some more flexibility from the federal government and have a chance to try fresh ideas, particularly ones that are just thoughtful policy. For example, non-traditional services. You have somebody who has had a history of heat stroke, help them with a little bit of assistance on air conditioning. And that's what you can do with the 1115 waiver. I believe we've got a decent chance of getting an extension for that waiver before the Obama administration leaves office. Now, there still could be issues, of course, on top of that. For example, if you got the 1115 waiver and you had a block grant, in effect, imposed on top of it, we'd still be facing some very serious budget challenges. And a third health issue that touches on what you're talking about is I got a provision in the Affordable Care Act called Section 1332. And it would, in effect, allow Oregon or any other state to really do its own thing as long as it met the coverage targets in the Affordable Care Act. So, for example, we could reward good health measures. We could have some more innovative approaches of helping with respect to helping the poor. We could, for example, get the right to start a public option at the state level in order to force some more bargaining power, to hold down the costs of medicine, to hold down the costs of insurance. So those are the three moving pieces.
Wow, that's interesting. So Oregon's one of the most trade-dependent states in the country. And I believe last year you stood up here and were very supportive of the notion of TPP passing. And with a lot of the language we've heard through the election, which might put our trade policies in danger or even be considered anti-trade, again, what can you do in your role to help make certain that Oregon still stays on a strong path on that front?
1 out of 5 jobs in our state revolves around trade. And especially important is the fact that the trade jobs often pay better than do the non-trade jobs because there is a higher value-added kind of component. So when people come to a town meeting, they say, Ron, what's your economic philosophy? I say, let's grow it in Oregon, let's make it in Oregon, let's add value to it in Oregon, let's ship it somewhere. That's my economic philosophy in a sentence. Now, obviously, trade policy is going to undertake a very thorough re-examination, and I think there are going to be some very different trade policies. So for the upcoming period, what I'll be doing as the ranking member on the Finance Committee, where we get trade issues, is saying, let's be tough, but let's also be smart. And let me give you an example of what I'm talking about with respect to these issues. For example, we have our softwood lumber producers. And they are right now in my view, titanic battle dealing with the subsidies that Canada gives for their forest products. And I've got about 20-some senators on our side. We're pushing back. This would be a natural for a Trump administration to go to bat for Oregon. It's being tough, but it's being smart. That'd be number one. Another area where you can be tough and smart is to beef up what you're doing on the borders. We have, for example, stolen natural resources, stolen intellectual property, goods made with child labor. These are all areas where the president-elect and his team could really help to work in a bipartisan way, and we could protect good-paying jobs. I mean, the reality is there are substantial problems with respect to enforcing our trade laws. A couple of years ago, I set up a sting operation, a phony website, inviting people to cheat, and we were just deluged. So if you want to rebuild trade policy, start with being tough and smart. Here's what I'm talking about with respect to smart. And I want everybody in Oregon to know just what's ahead. The president-elect said in the campaign that Apple, the Apple company, should just basically fork over all that information. And in effect, he was on his way to saying, as some in Congress want to do.
Are you talking about when the FBI was trying to unlock the...
Correct, right. Some in Congress want to weaken strong encryption, force companies to build back doors into their products. This is a bad idea from a security standpoint because we have all these smartphones and those security features protect, for example, your kid against pedophiles, number one. Number two, it obviously puts at risk your liberties because people can more easily get your information. But especially important for this audience is if we require companies to build back doors into their products, all our high-tech companies that compete against scores and scores of companies around the world, our companies will be disadvantaged because American consumers are going to want goods where there is a strong measure of protection for their data. There are loads of products around the world that have strong encryption. We weaken it. We weaken Oregon's high-tech sector in a very direct way.
Interesting. I had never put those two together. So you have been a long champion on tax reform. At the federal level, do you see a window of opportunity for tax reform that looks, more rational maybe than it does today?
I describe the American tax code as a rotting economic carcass, infected with viruses and loopholes. My wife says, "Will you just stop there? The children are getting frightened." The point really is, this would be a natural for people of goodwill to find some common ground. We showed, for example, in 2015, that you could do it in a bipartisan way. On the business side, the business community wanted the permanent research and development tax credit. They wanted improvements in the expensing provisions. I said, let's come up with a bipartisan deal here, and we did. It was coupled with an expansion of the child credit, the earned income tax credit. It was bipartisan. Now here's where I'm going to be coming out of the gate. The tax code in America today is really a tale of two systems. If you're outside, you're a cop on the beat, your taxes are compulsory. Your taxes come directly out of your paycheck. That's it. But if you're lucky and you can afford all kinds of special, tax help, you can, to a great extent, decide what you are going to pay, when you're going to pay it, and possibly nothing at all.
Wow.
And I want very much, coming out of the gate, for both sides to recognize that's the reality. There is a real opportunity for people of goodwill. I've already written the only 2 bipartisan federal income tax reform bills since the Reagan, Packwood, Bill Bradley, Dan Rostenkowski days. I would love to write a 3rd, be part of a 3rd. But you have to say we're going to have a tax code that gives everybody in America the chance to get ahead, not just the 1% or a portion of the 1%.
Do you think you got a shot of that given the players on that committee?
I do, and again, it's going to have to be built around principle. Democrats believe, correctly in my view, that the tax code's been hijacked by special interests. Republicans say this thing is such a mess, it doesn't allow the private sector to have the certainty and predictability it needs. I happen to share both views. That was what my tax reform bills were built around. So I do think that there is a real opportunity here.
That'll be fun to watch.
It'll definitely be fun to watch. Isn't any question about that.
Yeah, we're glad you're there in that committee in particular. Any other priorities in the upcoming Congress?
Well, probably the other that comes to mind is we understand you cannot have big league economic growth with little league infrastructure. And we have traffic jams and bottlenecks in parts of Oregon where nobody could have dreamed of a traffic jam. So this is another opportunity for something bipartisan. The reality is we have enormous sums of money essentially languishing, overseas. And I think there would be a good opportunity to bring some of that cash back and use it for our roads and our bridges and our ports and our transportation systems. And again, this is a question of both sides saying we have principles. Some of my colleagues want to use every dime of the money brought back for tax cuts, essentially, for those at the very top. I'm going to oppose that. But I'd certainly want to work with them to bring back money so that we're more competitive. But let's also use it, or a portion of it, to repair this crumbling, infrastructure. Because I think as we look at our competition around the world, our competition is putting enormous sums into trying to build an economic advantage around transportation and infrastructure. I don't want us to be playing catch-up ball.
You're left behind. Senator, it's always a pleasure and inspiration. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for all you're doing.